She was 5 years old, standing alone in a dark alley in the South Dakota cold, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear longer than the other. She had walked 3 blocks by herself. She had stopped at the gate of the most feared motorcycle club in the county. And when the biggest, most bearded man she had ever seen opened that gate and looked down at her, she didn't run. She didn't cry. She said, "My mum is mean." So I left. What happened next didn't make the news. There were no cameras, no reporters. But 47 people sat down together that Thanksgiving, and one little girl in a green corduroy dress changed 4 lives, including her own mother's. This is their story. The wind had a particular cruelty to it in Sturgis in late October. It wasn't the dramatic, howling kind that people write songs about. It was the slow, grinding kind, the kind that found every crack in every wall, that slipped under doors and through worn window frames and settled into bones like a debt that never got paid. The kind of cold that reminded you quietly and without mercy that the world did not particularly care whether you were warm or not. Angel felt it the moment he stepped out onto the porch of the Iron Brotherhood's clubhouse that Tuesday evening. He pulled a cigarette from the inside pocket of his cut, the worn leather vest that had been on his back for 23 years, patched and repatched until the patches themselves had patches, and lit it with the brass lighter he'd carried since his early 30s. The flame trembled in the wind. He cupped it with both hands and got the cigarette going on the 3rd try. The clubhouse sat on the western edge of Sturgis, on a patch of land that the city had more or less forgotten about. The building itself was a converted auto garage from the 1960s, its original metal siding long since painted over in flat black. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Iron Brotherhood, EST, 1987, in faded white letters. 2 flags hung on either side, the American flag and the club's own colors, a winged skull above crossed wrenches. The parking lot out front held 6 bikes covered in canvas tarps for the winter. During the August rally, that lot would overflow down the street. Now it was empty, except for tire tracks in the mud. Angel was a large man, not the cartoonish, threatening large that people sometimes imagined when they thought of men like him, but the kind of large that came from decades of physical work and outdoor living. Broad shoulders, arms thick from years of wrenching on engines. He stood 6 feet 2, with a grey-streaked beard that reached his collarbone, and dark eyes that had long ago learned to give nothing away. The tattoos on his forearms were a biographical record of his life. Names, dates, symbols he'd chosen at 22 that meant something different to him at 48. His real name was Douglas Merritt, but no one had called him that in at least 15 years. Angel was what the road had made him, and Angel was what he answered to. He'd been the chapter president for 11 years. The job was less glamorous than it sounded. It meant mediating disputes between men who didn't like being told what to do. It meant keeping the finances straight, making sure the property taxes got paid, organizing the charity rides that were, frankly, the thing he was most proud of. Every Thanksgiving, they ran a food drive for 3 counties. Every Christmas, they delivered toys to the Children's Hospital in Rapid City. The news never covered those rides. The news only showed up when there was trouble, and there hadn't been real trouble in the Iron Brotherhood for a long time. Not since Angel had taken the gavel and made it clear, quietly but unmistakably, that certain chapters in the club's past were exactly that, the past. He was on his 2nd cigarette and thinking about nothing in particular: the thermostat in the garage bay that needed replacing, a phone call he owed his sister in Billings, when he heard it. A knock. Not on the front door of the clubhouse, where visitors occasionally came with legitimate business. This knock came from the side gate, a low wooden gate in the chain-link fence that separated the parking lot from the small alley running along the building's east wall. It was the kind of gate that adults had to lean down to reach the latch on. No one used it. There was no reason to use it. The knock came again. 3 small, deliberate raps, like someone had practiced them. Angel turned his head. The parking lot was empty. The street beyond the chain link was quiet, a single sodium lamp painting the wet asphalt in amber. He walked down the 3 porch steps and crossed the lot toward the gate, his boots crunching on gravel. He reached the gate and looked over it. On the other side, standing in the alley, in a pink winter coat that was 2 sizes too small, was a little girl. She was small, genuinely small, the kind of small that made you instinctively want to make sure there were no cars nearby. She had brown, curly hair that had been put into pigtails by someone who hadn't quite managed to make them even, and her eyes, which were looking straight up at him without flinching, were a pale, serious blue. She was wearing the pink coat and a pair of purple rubber boots with cartoon frogs on them, and she had a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. A well-loved rabbit, grey with washing, one ear slightly longer than the other. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Hi," she said. Angel glanced up and down the alley, empty in both directions. "Hey," he said. "My name is Ellie." "Okay." "My mom is mean," she said. She stated it the way a person might state a fact about the weather, not with drama, not with tears, but with the particular gravity of a child who has decided that something is simply true and needs to be said out loud to someone. So I left. Angel stood very still for a moment. 23 years of riding, of handling situations that required a level head. None of it had quite prepared him for this. "How old are you, Ellie?" She held up one hand with all 5 fingers spread. 5. "But I'm almost 6. He crouched down to her level, which put him close to the gate. Up close, he could see that her eyes were slightly red at the rims, the way eyes get after crying that's been finished for a while. Her nose was running just slightly in the cold. The stuffed rabbit, he noticed, had a name written on its ear in faded marker. Benny. "Where do you live?" he asked. She pointed down the alley with one small finger. "That way. The house with the blue mailbox." Angel knew the house. A rental 3 blocks east. He'd seen lights on in it at odd hours. He didn't know the people. "Does your mum know where you are?" Ellie considered this with more seriousness than he expected. "Probably not," she said. Then, as if offering additional evidence for her case, "She was yelling. She yells a lot when she's tired." Angel looked at her for a long moment. The cold was real, and she was underdressed for it, and she was 5 years old, and she was standing alone in an alley behind a biker clubhouse because she'd decided her mom was mean and gone looking for someone to tell. He stood up. He unlatched the gate. "You want to come inside?" he said. "It's warm. I think there might be hot chocolate." Ellie looked past him at the dark clubhouse, then back at his face, making some private calculation. Then she nodded once, tucked Benny more firmly under her arm, and walked through the gate. Rex was the one who actually knew where the hot chocolate was. He found it in the 3rd cabinet he tried. A box of instant packets, the kind with the little marshmallows, shoved behind a bag of coffee filters and a can of condensed milk that had been there so long no one remembered buying it. He made a mug of it in the small kitchen off the main room, stirring it with genuine concentration, the way he did most things. Rex approached the world with the same patient thoroughness he applied to engine work, which was probably why he'd been the club's best mechanic for 20 years, and also why people tended to trust him with things they wouldn't trust anyone else with. He was 52, built like a man who had spent his life doing physical labor, with a shaved head and a thick red beard going to grey, and hands that were permanently stained at the knuckles with grease that no amount of scrubbing fully removed. He had a daughter in Denver, 24 now, an accountant completely baffled by her father's life, but devoted to him in the quiet way that children sometimes are, with parents they can't quite explain. He drove to Denver 4 times a year. He never missed her birthday. When he came back into the main room with the mug of hot chocolate, Ellie was sitting on the old couch in the corner, the one that had been there since before Angel's tenure, a massive green sectional that had absorbed 20 years of use and still somehow held its shape, with her rabbit on her lap and her purple frog boots dangling 6 inches above the floor. She was looking around the room with the focused attention of a scientist conducting field work. The main room of the Iron Brotherhood's clubhouse was not designed to be welcoming to 5-year-olds. The walls were covered in framed photographs, club memorabilia, road maps with routes marked in red marker. A pool table dominated the center of the room. A bar ran along the back wall, currently unstocked for the off-season. The overhead lights were fluorescent and slightly too bright. 2 space heaters hummed in opposite corners. Cole had come in from the garage when he heard Angel's voice. He was the youngest full member, 31, with a lean runner's build and sandy hair he kept short. He'd grown up in Rapid City, joined the club at 26 after a stint in the army, and had the slightly earnest quality of someone who still found things worth being enthusiastic about. He was currently leaning against the pool table, staring at Ellie, with an expression somewhere between amused and bewildered. Rex set the hot chocolate on the low table in front of the couch. "Careful," he said. "It's hot." Ellie set Benny carefully on the cushion beside her and wrapped both hands around the mug, testing the temperature with her palms before attempting a sip. Then she looked at Rex. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," Rex said. Angel had called the non-emergency police line from the kitchen, quietly, with the door half closed. The dispatcher had taken the information and told him an officer would be by within the hour. Child services would be notified. Standard procedure. Angel had said fine, they'd keep her safe in the meantime, and hung up. Now he came back into the main room and stood at the edge of it, watching. Cole caught his eye and gave a small shrug that said, "I have no idea either." "Ellie," Angel said, settling into the armchair across from the couch. He sat the way large men sometimes do in furniture that wasn't made for them, leaning forward, elbows on knees, making himself smaller on purpose. "Can I ask you something?" "Okay," she said, both hands still around the mug. "When you left your house, did you walk here by yourself?" "Yes." "How did you know to come here?" She thought about this. "I walked until I saw a light," she said. "Your light was on outside." She paused. "And the picture?" "What picture?" "The one on your door, with the wings." She pointed at the front door, where a sticker of the club's emblem, the winged skull, had been there so long it was part of the door. "It looked like an angel, so I thought maybe it was okay." The 3 men exchanged a look over her head. Cole opened his mouth and Angel silenced him with a look that said, "Don't." "Smart thinking," Angel said instead. Over the next 40 minutes, they learned the following things about Ellie Johnson. She was 5 years, 8 months old. She lived with her mother Diane, 3 blocks away. She had no father that she mentioned, no siblings. She liked dinosaurs, particularly the kind with the long necks, and she did not like the kind with lots of teeth, though she acknowledged they were interesting. Her rabbit, Benny, had been given to her by her grandmother, who lived far away and was old. Her favorite color was green, not pink, despite the coat. She had learned to read some words already. She was going to kindergarten next year and was pretty sure she would like it. What she did not say, and what none of them pushed her to say, was anything more about her mother or what had happened before she knocked on the gate. She had stated her case. "My mom is mean, so I left," and seemed to consider the matter adequately summarized. She drank her hot chocolate slowly and answered their questions about dinosaurs with genuine thoroughness. Rex, who had once been fluent in the emotional language of a small child and hadn't realized until this moment how much he'd missed it, found himself pulling out his phone and finding pictures of long-necked dinosaurs to show her. She narrated each one with authority. Cole made himself useful by sweeping the floor, which did not need sweeping, just to have something to do with his hands. Angel watched all of it from his chair and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, something he didn't have an immediate word for. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter than that. When the knock came at the front door 40 minutes later, it was not the police. It was a woman, 28, thin, her dark hair pulled back in a hurried ponytail. She was wearing a sweatshirt and jeans and no coat, and her eyes, when Angel opened the door, were red and frantic in a way that was distinct from anger. She'd been crying recently. Her hands, gripping the doorframe, were trembling. "Is my daughter here?" she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. From inside the clubhouse they heard a small voice. "Mama?" Diane Johnson stood in the doorway and did not move. She could see Ellie over the large man's shoulder, her daughter sitting on a green couch with a mug between her hands, and 3 strangers around her, completely unharmed, slightly smug in the way that 5-year-olds can be when they have successfully made their point. The relief that hit Diane was so physical it was almost like being struck. Her knees went soft. She put one hand on the doorframe and breathed. "She's fine," the large man said. His voice was lower than she expected and calmer. "She's been here about 45 minutes. We called it in. An officer is on the way." Diane nodded. She was still breathing through the relief, working to get her face back under control. Can I come in?" He stepped back. She came inside. Ellie had climbed down from the couch and was standing a few feet into the room, Benny under her arm, watching her mother with an expression that was simultaneously guilty and resolute. It was an expression Diane knew. She'd been seeing it since Ellie was 3. That particular set of the jaw that meant, "I did what I did, and I'm not entirely sorry." Diane crossed the room and crouched down and pulled her daughter against her chest, and Ellie, after a brief moment of maintaining her position, put both arms around her mother's neck and held on. "You scared me," Diane said into her daughter's hair. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You were yelling," Ellie said, muffled against her shoulder. "I know." A pause. "I know, baby." The 3 men had moved, without discussion, with the intuitive tact that people sometimes develop when they've lived in close quarters, to the other side of the room, near the bar. They were not watching. Or rather, they were watching in the way that people watch things they pretend not to see. Angel studied Diane as she held her daughter. He'd seen many kinds of people in many kinds of situations over 23 years, and he'd gotten reasonably good at reading them. What he saw was exhaustion. Not the ordinary kind, but the structural kind, the kind that had been built up over a long time and had gotten load-bearing. She was thin in the way that suggested meals skipped not by choice, but by circumstance. The sweatshirt was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Her hands, when she'd gripped the doorframe, had the roughness of someone who worked with them. When she finally stood up, Ellie's hand in hers, she looked at the 3 of them with an expression he recognized. Shame. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. She's never done anything like this. I don't know what—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Thank you for keeping her safe." "She knocked on the gate," Rex said from across the room. He kept his voice easy, no judgment in it. She introduced herself, asked for help. Something shifted in Diane's expression. She looked down at Ellie. "You knocked on their gate." "I walked until I found a light," Ellie said, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. The officer arrived 12 minutes later. His name was Daniels, young, efficient professional. He took statements in the small kitchen, spoke to Ellie briefly and gently while Diane waited in the main room, then sat down with Diane for a longer conversation that Angel couldn't hear through the closed door. When they came out, Daniels told Angel that Child Protective Services would conduct a follow-up visit, that it was standard procedure, that everything seemed okay for tonight. He did not say this in the tone of someone who thought everything was entirely okay. After the officer left, Diane stood in the middle of the main room with Ellie beside her, her hand resting on her daughter's curly head, and looked at the door as if calculating the precise geometry of leaving, how to do it, what to say, how to make herself walk out of this room with enough dignity intact to survive the drive home. Angel spoke before she could get there. "You want coffee?" he said. "Before you go. It's cold out." She looked at him. It was a measuring look, the look of someone deciding whether an offer is genuine or complicated. "Just coffee," he said. She sat down. What came out over the next hour was not a confession. It was not a dramatic unburdening. It was more like a slow leak. The kind that happens when someone has been holding something sealed for a long time and is too tired to keep the seal perfect. Diane worked 2 jobs, days at a dry cleaner on Junction Avenue, 4 evenings a week as a cashier at the grocery store on the highway. Ellie's daycare cost more than her car payment. The car had broken down 3 weeks ago, and she'd been taking the city bus, which added 40 minutes each way to her commute. The heat in their rental had been inconsistent since September, and the landlord had so far responded to her 3 calls with cheerful promises and no action. That evening, she told them, she had come home from a double shift, the dry cleaner in the morning, the grocery store until 9, to find that Ellie had spilled an entire bottle of red juice on the carpet in the living room while trying to pour it herself. The security deposit, which Diane needed back when their lease ended, was tied to that carpet. She had yelled. She knew she'd yelled too much. She had gone to the bathroom to wash her face and calm down, and when she came back, the front door had been open. She said all of this to a spot on the table between her and Angel, in a voice stripped of self-pity. Just the facts, just the shape of things. When she was done, the room was quiet for a moment. Rex, who had given Ellie a pad of paper and a pen and pointed her toward the pool table to draw dinosaurs, turned his coffee mug slowly in his hands. "Your heat's been out since September." Diane looked up. "Mostly it comes on sometimes." He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was solving a problem. "What kind of unit?" "I don't know. It's in a closet in the hall. There's a box with dials. Probably a baseboard control. Sometimes the thermostat coupling goes, and the landlord doesn't bother because people don't know what to look for." He paused. "If I came by tomorrow and looked at it, would that be all right?" Diane stared at him. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Rex said pleasantly. "Would it be all right?" She looked at Angel, as if checking for the catch. He gave her nothing, just waited. "Okay," she said. "Yes, thank you." Cole, from his position at the end of the bar, had been quiet through all of it. Now he leaned forward. "Is the bus route okay for getting Ellie to school next year?" Diane looked at him. "The kindergarten is on Calumet. The Route 7 doesn't go there." Cole nodded, like he was filing it away. On the couch, Ellie had fallen asleep with Benny on her chest, the pad of paper on her lap filled with what appeared to be an ambitious attempt at a brontosaurus. 2 weeks passed. In those 2 weeks, certain things happened quietly, without announcement, the way things sometimes do when people decide to do them, not because anyone is watching, but because the alternative, doing nothing, has become impossible. Rex came by the rental on Calumet Street the morning after at 9 o'clock with a tool bag and a thermostat coupling he'd sourced from a supply house in Rapid City. He spent 40 minutes in the hallway closet, came out, adjusted a dial on the baseboard unit in the living room, and told Diane to run it for an hour and see. When she called him 2 hours later and said it was working, genuinely working, the whole apartment warm for the first time in weeks, he told her to document the date in a text to her landlord so she had a record, just in case. She said she would. Cole had driven the bus routes on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and a notebook, mapping the transfers from their block to the school on Calumet, timing each one. He'd come up with a route that worked, 38 minutes, 2 transfers, entirely doable. And had also, while looking at the map, noticed that the mechanic shop on Ridge Street, which was owned by a man named Walt, who owed the Iron Brotherhood a favor from a fundraiser 2 years prior, was 4 blocks from Diane's dry cleaner. He'd called Walt. Walt had called the towing service. Diane's car had been towed to the shop and was returned to her 9 days later with a new alternator and a bill for parts only. Labor covered. She had not known how to respond to this. She had called the number Cole had texted her, gotten his voicemail, and left a message that was 12 seconds long and mostly silence, with a few words that weren't quite adequate for what she meant. Angel had done something different. He'd made a phone call to Karen Mitchell, who ran the regional office for the South Dakota Department of Social Services, and who had known Angel for 6 years, since the club had started donating to the department's holiday gift drive. They'd had coffee twice. She was a practical woman in her mid-40s who understood that help came from unexpected places and had long ago decided to care more about outcomes than origins. He'd described the situation, carefully, accurately, without embellishment. A single working mother, 2 jobs, structural stress. An incident that had scared everyone, including, he suspected, the mother most of all. A little girl who was clearly loved, clearly cared for, clearly smart, who had gone looking for help and found it, which said something important about her and also about the state of available resources. Karen had listened. Then she'd told him about a program, a transitional assistance program for working single parents, income-based, covering childcare subsidy and emergency transportation costs. The waiting list was long, but there were occasional expedited placements for documented cases. She would look into it. "You know this isn't how it usually works," she'd said. "I know," Angel had said. "I'm just telling you the situation. I'll look into it." She'd called back in 4 days. Diane Johnson's name had been moved up the list based on documented need and the incident report filed by Officer Daniels. She would receive a case review visit the following week. The child care subsidy, if she qualified, and Karen expected she would cover 60% of Ellie's daycare costs starting with the new year. Angel had called Diane to tell her. She had been at work, so he'd left a voicemail, which he was bad at, and which he'd had to record twice because the first version was too long and said too much about things that weren't his business. The second version was 30 seconds and contained just the necessary facts and Karen Mitchell's direct number. On the 14th day, Ellie knocked on the gate again. Angel was on the porch again, at almost exactly the same time of evening. The particular Tuesday timing of it was something he'd note to himself later, not sure what it meant. He heard the 3 deliberate raps and felt something in his chest that was not quite surprise. He crossed the lot and opened the gate. Ellie was there, pink coat, purple frog boots, Benny under the arm. This time her hair was in neater pigtails, symmetrical, clearly done by someone who'd taken their time. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Angel said. "My mom said I could come," she said. "She's waiting on the street. She said to not stay long." She paused. "I brought something." She held out a paper folded into quarters. He took it and unfolded it. It was a drawing, done in crayon, with the concentrated effort of a 5-year-old who has something to say. On the left side of the paper, in a reasonable approximation of a motorcycle, were 3 figures, large, with beards, clearly meant to be men. On the right side, in green, her favorite color, not pink, was a small curly-haired figure, and next to it, a slightly taller figure with dark hair. Between the 2 groups, in careful, deliberate letters that were sized differently because the writer had not yet fully mastered consistency, but each letter was legible, each one chosen. "Thank you." Angel stood in the open gate and looked at the drawing for what was probably too long. "It's us," Ellie said helpfully. "I can see that," he said. "The one in the middle is you," she said, pointing at the central large figure. "I made you the biggest because you're the biggest." He folded the drawing carefully. exact thirds, the way you fold something you intend to keep, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his cut next to the brass lighter. "Tell your mum." He stopped, reconsidered. "Tell your mum to come to Thanksgiving," he said. "We do a dinner, every year, for anyone who needs a place to be." Ellie considered this. "Are there dinosaurs?" "There are no dinosaurs," he said seriously, "but there is pie, multiple pies." She weighed this. "Okay," she said, "I'll tell her." She gave a small wave, tucked Benny more firmly under her arm, and walked back down the alley. He watched her until she reached the street, and he could see the outline of Diane waiting on the sidewalk. Diane, who reached down immediately and took her daughter's hand and looked back once toward the alley, not quite able to see him in the shadow of the gate. He raised one hand, she raised hers. Then they walked away, and Angel stood in the open gate in the cold for another minute before he went inside. Rex was at the pool table. "Who was it?" he asked without looking up. "Ellie," Angel said. Rex looked up. "She okay? She brought a drawing." He patted the inside pocket of his cut. "She made me the biggest because I'm the biggest." Rex was quiet for a moment. Then a slow smile moved across his face, the kind that comes from somewhere real, unhurried, arriving in its own time. "Sounds about right," he said. Cole came in from the kitchen. "What'd I miss?" "Nothing," Angel said. But his voice, which had been flat and even for most of his adult life, had something different in it now, something that the people who knew him best would have recognized immediately, something that sounded despite everything, despite 23 years of hard road and hard choices and the deliberate construction of a man who did not need things to be soft, like it had been placed there gently, by small hands, and intended to stay. Thanksgiving arrived the way it does in South Dakota, bluntly, without apology, dragging a hard wind off the plains and temperatures that bottomed out overnight and stayed low. The Iron Brotherhood's annual dinner had been happening since 1994, which meant this was the 32nd year. What had started as 11 men eating canned soup in the clubhouse had evolved over 3 decades into something that now required coordination. Tables borrowed from the community center, folding chairs stacked in the garage bay, and retrieved the morning of a 20-pound turkey that Rex started in the large roasting pan at 6 in the morning, 2 more brought in from a restaurant supply contact in spearfish. Cole handled the sides, which he approached with the same methodical seriousness he brought to everything: 4 kinds of pies, 2 types of stuffing, sweet potatoes, green beans, dinner rolls that he'd started from scratch the night before and risen overnight in the clubhouse kitchen. By noon, the parking lot that was usually home to tarped bikes and mud had been cleared and set with 2 long folding tables under a rented canopy, heated with propane burners. The guest list was informal by design. Word spread through the community networks that Angel had spent years quietly cultivating: the food bank, the veterans support group, the transitional housing program 2 blocks from the Methodist church. People came who needed a place to be. That was the only criterion. That had always been the only criterion. By 12:30, 47 people were seated at the tables. Diane and Ellie arrived at 12:45. Diane had borrowed a car from a woman at the dry cleaner, a friendly loan, easily arranged, the kind of small social transaction that builds up over years of reliable work and pleasant conversation. She parked on the street and helped Ellie out of the back seat and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, holding her daughter's hand, looking at the parking lot with its canopy and its tables and its propane heaters, and the 47 people already talking and eating and passing dishes back and forth. She had almost not come. That was the truth of it. She had stood in her apartment that morning in the kitchen that was finally reliably warm, and held the phone with Karen Mitchell's number on the screen and felt the particular weight of accepting help, the complicated gravity of it, the way it required you to admit something about yourself that was painful to admit. She was capable. She worked hard. She did not want to be someone who knocked on doors and received charity. But then Ellie had come into the kitchen, dressed already in her best outfit, a green corduroy dress her grandmother had sent for her birthday, Benny tucked under one arm, and had looked at her mother with the straightforward clarity that children sometimes have and said, "Are we going to the pie place?" And Diane had put down the phone and gotten her coat. Angel saw them from across the lot. He excused himself from a conversation with a veteran named Marcus and crossed toward the entrance, catching Diane's eye as she came through the gate. "You made it," he said. "We made it," she said. Her voice was steady. He looked down at Ellie, who was surveying the crowd with the calculating assessment of someone planning a route. "Hi, Angel," she said without looking up. "Hi, Ellie. Is the pie already out?" "Pie comes after the meal." She looked up at him. "That seems like a long time." "It's not that long," he said. "Come on." He walked them to two open seats, not at the end, not tucked away, but in the middle of the long table where the conversation was loudest and the dishes passed fastest. He introduced Diane to the couple on her left, Gary and Patrice, who ran the food bank and had been coming to this dinner since 1999, and to the woman on Ellie's right, a quiet older woman named Barbara, who had a hearing aid and a very large cardigan, and who looked at Ellie's rabbit with the expression of someone who knew exactly what well-loved stuffed animals meant. Rex served the turkey. Coal circulated with the sides. The noise of 47 people eating and talking and laughing in a parking lot in South Dakota in November was specific and warm and real. And Diane sat in the middle of it and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not fixed, not solved, not different, but held. Like a thing being carried for a moment by hands other than her own, giving her arms a rest she hadn't known she'd needed. At some point during the meal, she looked down the table and found Angel watching. Not staring, just the particular, noticing kind of watching that someone does when they are checking on a thing they care about. She met his eyes. He gave a small nod. She gave one back. Ellie, for her part, had befriended Barbara entirely within the first 15 minutes and was now showing her a drawing she'd produced from somewhere in her coat. The same pad of paper from the night at the clubhouse, it appeared, which she apparently carried everywhere now. Barbara was examining it with the serious attention it deserved. After the meal, when the pie came out, 4 different kinds, as promised, Ellie stood up on her chair to see the options and said, entirely sincerely, "This is the best day." Cole, who was nearest to her, caught the chair leg before it could tip. Diane put her hand on her daughter's back. "Sit down, Elle. But I need to see all the pies." "I'll tell you what they are," Cole said. He listed them. Ellie listened with the focused attention of someone making a very important decision. "Pecan," she said finally, "and also apple." "Good choices," he said. After dinner, when people had begun to drift, back to cars, back to homes or shelters, or wherever the evening was taking them, Diane found a moment when Ellie was still occupied with Barbara and went to find Angel, where he was stacking folding chairs at the edge of the lot. "I need to say something," she said. He set down the chair he was holding and waited. "I know what you did," she said. "Karen Mitchell told me someone had called her about the program." She paused. "I know it was you." He said nothing. "I don't know how to—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I work hard. I've always worked hard. I've never wanted anyone to—" She stopped again, and this time the stop was longer, and something moved across her face that she didn't try to hide. "I've been doing this alone for so long, and I keep thinking I should be able to do it perfectly. Like if I work hard enough, nothing should—" A breath. But things still broke, and I couldn't fix them all by myself. She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady. "She knocked on your gate because she was scared," Diane said, "and you didn't turn her away. You kept her safe, and then you kept on helping, and I just—" She shook her head. "I needed you to know that it matters. It matters a lot." Angel was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who found words easy in moments like this. He had, over decades, made peace with that. But he thought about the drawing in the inside pocket of his cut, the one with the careful crayon letters, each one chosen. He thought about 23 years of a road that had not always been straight, choices that had not always been right, a version of himself at 22 that he would not entirely recognize now and would not entirely blame now either. He thought about the particular way Ellie had looked at him over the gate, straight up, without flinching, ready to state her case. "She knocked," he said. "That was the brave part. She's 5 years old and she decided something needed to change, and she went looking for help. All we did was answer the door." Diane nodded slowly. "Still," she said. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he said. And then, because it was true, and because he wanted her to know it, "She changed something here. Ellie did. I'm not sure I can explain it, but she did." Diane smiled. Not the careful, provisional smile she'd worn the first night, but something fuller than that. "She has a way of doing that," she said. Across the lot, Ellie had climbed back onto her chair and was now apparently teaching Barbara something about brontosauruses, using a fork as a visual aid. Barbara was listening with complete attention, nodding at intervals. Cole caught Angel's eye from across the lot and tilted his head toward Ellie. Angel followed the look and watched his youngest club member crouch down beside the little girl and join the conversation. Ellie immediately redirecting her explanation to include this new audience, fork still raised, Benny propped against a pie tin. Rex, washing dishes in the clubhouse kitchen through the open window, was humming something low and tuneless, the way he did when he was content. The propane heaters pushed warm air out into the cold evening, the canopy held against the wind. The last of the daylight went down behind the hills to the west of Sturgis, and the parking lot filled up with the amber of the rented string lights that Cole had strung that morning, and 47 people, reduced now to 20, then 15, then the small core of people who stay until the end, kept talking in the way that people talk when they are not yet ready for the warmth to be over. Ellie fell asleep in the car on the way home, Benny on her chest, the green corduroy dress still clean, both pigtails still mostly intact. Diane drove through the empty streets of Sturgis with the heater on and the radio low, her daughter breathing softly in the back seat, and thought about what it meant to ask for help and what it meant to receive it. How those things were not failures, but how they required a kind of courage she hadn't always given herself credit for having. How Ellie had taught her that, without trying, by simply walking out the door and following a light. When she got home and carried her daughter from the car, Ellie barely stirring, one arm coming up automatically around her mother's neck, she stood for a moment in the parking lot of their building in the cold and looked at the warm light in their window. The heat was on. The apartment was warm. She carried her daughter inside. Across Sturgis, in the Iron Brotherhood's clubhouse, Angel sat alone in the main room after the last of the others had gone. The room was quiet in the particular way rooms get after a lot of people have been in them. A full silence, not an empty one. He reached into the inside pocket of his cut and unfolded the drawing, spreading it flat on the table in front of him. The crayon motorcycle, the large bearded figures, the small girl in green, the taller woman beside her. The letters, different sizes, each one chosen carefully. "Thank you." He looked at it for a long time. Then he folded it back along its creases, exact thirds, as before, and put it back where he kept it. He turned off the lights. He locked the door. He walked out into the cold Dakota night and stood for a moment on the porch where he'd been standing 5 weeks earlier, when 3 small raps on a gate had changed the temperature of the evening. The street was quiet. The sodium lamp painted the wet asphalt amber. He lit a cigarette, the flame held on the first try.